Nancy's Adirondack Art presents Farmer Peter Rabbit, written and sculpted by Nancy McGrath.
Do you all know who Peter Rabbit is? Well, he's that naughty little bunny who was always after Mr. McGregor's garden. His mother told him every morning before he left the burrow to behave, but Peter never listened. He was forever sneaking under the garden gate and helping himself to all those juicy vegetables that Mr. McGregor worked so hard to tend to every day. Mr. McGregor was constantly on the lookout for Peter. If you have read the story by Beatrix Potter, you'll know that Peter had many close encounters. Why, one day the farmer cornered him in a watering can full of water. Peter was a very clever rabbit, so he managed to escape, but it was a close call, and he lost his brand new blue jacket his mother had just made him. You would think that would have made Peter wiser, and he would have stayed away from that garden. There were plenty of other things, grass, clover, berries, all sorts of things a rabbit could eat. But Peter had developed a taste for those juicy vegetables in Mr. McGregor's garden, especially the carrots, so he continued his raids. Peter kept raiding the garden for several years until he became a very grown-up rabbit, and during all that time, Mr. McGregor never stopped trying to think of a foolproof way to catch that pesky Peter Rabbit. So finally, one spring, Mr. McGregor came up with a plan. He would lay a net flat on the ground and plant carrots right on top of it, and when Peter stepped on that carrot patch, he'd have 'em. It was a good plan. The little seeds grew into small carrots and then into fat, juicy ones. Peter decided the time was right to help himself to one or two of those carrots. As soon as he tugged at that first one, the whole earth, carrots, pebbles, blue coat, fuzzy bunny tail, and Peter's shocked face were all gathered up into a ball in the net and swung back and forth from the old apple tree that was on the side of the garden. Peter couldn't believe it. Mr. McGregor couldn't believe it. Mr. McGregor stood in front of the swaying net and just stared at Peter. Peter stared back. After Mr. McGregor got over his shock, he reached into the net and grabbed Peter by the ears. He walked into his house, yelling to his wife to put a pot on the stove. They were having rabbit stew for supper. Peter shivered. Mr. McGregor put Peter in a cage that he had ready for just this moment. Then he went to get his butcher's knife. When Mr. McGregor returned with his gleaming knife, he was moving very slowly. Peter watched him through the bars. Mr. McGregor stood in front of the cage and quietly, so quietly that Peter barely heard him, said, "I can't do it." Great relief flooded through Peter, and to be honest, through Mr. McGregor as well. When Mr. McGregor thought back over all those years, he realized that bunnies never really ate very much. All Peter ever took was a carrot occasionally, a lettuce leaf, or maybe a turnip once in a while. "Why, that was nothing," he chuckled to himself. Aloud he said, "Peter, you have given me years of trying to outwit you. Why, if not for you, I would have missed out on all that fun. But I am getting older. Soon my children will be taking care of this garden, and I'm not sure if they will understand you as I do. We must find a solution." So every day when Mr. McGregor's work was done, he and Peter would sit and talk. Peter in his cage would munch on his fresh carrot, and Mr. McGregor would explain all the ins and outs about raising vegetables and having a garden to be proud of. Peter was very interested in everything Mr. McGregor had to say. In fact, one day Peter wistfully said, "I wish I could have a garden to work in and raise my own carrots. You make it sound so wonderful." Mr. McGregor immediately jumped to his feet and yelled, "That's it! I will give you a small plot of land on the corner of my farm. You can raise your own garden." And he chuckled, "Leave mine alone." A grateful tear rose to the corner of Peter's eye. "You would do that for me?" Mr. McGregor threw open the cage door and lifted Peter out and put him on his shoulder. He set out for a special spot he knew, behind the barn and beyond the brook. "Here you are," he said satisfactorily. "This was a special place for me when I was a young lad. No one ever comes here, and it is very peaceful." Peter was overwhelmed. Mr. McGregor brought him a supply of carrots and some other vegetables to last him until he grew his own. He also brought him seeds, a bucket, a hoe, and a rake, all Peter's size, and lastly, a red wagon for Peter to go to market. They were both very pleased and happy and promised to always be friends and to help each other in times of trouble. And to this day they are and always do.